The Major 1 qualifiers are done, guys, and we've had some of the most intense and exciting matches so far in Modern Warfare 2, with a bunch of teams fighting for the top spots in the standings heading into the first Major of the year. But before we get into the Major, I just want to do a little recap, talk about some of the top players from the Major 1 qualifiers, the top teams, as well as some storylines. Now, I know you guys probably know a few that have occurred, but there's a lot to get into before we get into the first Major of the year. And the cool thing about the first Major of the year is this is going to be a old school style event. And what I mean by that is it's going to be a pool play into a bracket play. And there isn't just the CDL teams. There are 4 challenger teams that are going to be going into each of the 4 pools. So it's going to be exciting, but there's a lot to get into. And this is probably the closest it's ever been in the beginning of a Call of Duty with all of these teams. I was actually kind of surprised that this is how it ended. So first, we're going to highlight the top teams in the Major 1 qualifiers. And there's 2 of them that stand alone. It is the Minnesota Rocker and the Toronto Ultra. They're both 3-1. They're both at the top of the standings. And look, hear me out. I know the Minnesota Rocker probably gave a lot of y'all a sour taste. They went up against Optic early on. Okay, Optic ended up getting forfeited. We already talked about that. There's no reason to going back to it, but the Minnesota Rockers still have looked very good, even in that series versus Optic. And for me, this is kind of shocking because if you were to ask me which teams were going to be at the top of the standings going into the first stage, you know, I would have been saying LAT, obviously, Stan, or the Atlanta FaZe, or maybe even Optic Gaming. Minnesota and Toronto are both good teams, but I didn't think that they would be at the top, okay? I didn't think that they would be the only teams with a positive record in the entire league going into the first Major. And then for some of the top players in the qualifiers, look, there's some names that you're expecting, and there's also some names that I'm sure you're gonna be surprised to hear. Now, a name that is surprising to me is Minnesota Rockers Afro. He had a 1.19 KD in the qualifiers, and I thought he was a solid player last year for London, but he just wasn't a superstar, or he wasn't consistent enough to be a superstar, right? I think that this could be his game. I think it maybe suits his style a little bit more. And he's been great for Minnesota. One of the reasons that they are at the top of the standings. Another one is Scump. Now, Scump is one of the greatest players of all time. Look, I know that, guys, but Scump, he's been around for a while, okay? He's not necessarily in his prime, but this game, I don't know if it's just because it reminds me of an old school COD where there just really isn't any movement abusing mechanics. It's really just about your situational awareness, right? Your COD timing, knowing when a player is going to be in this specific position, which is probably Scump's best attribute that he's had in his entire career, realistically. But he's got a 1.18 KD overall in the qualifiers, the best on the team, and 3rd overall in the league. And then you have 2 Toronto Ultra players in Scrappy and Standy. Both of them were outstanding in the qualifiers. Scrappy had a 1.18 overall KD. Standy sitting at a 1.16 heading into the Major. You also have London Royal Ravens Asum. Okay, Asum is a player that gets a lot of flack. I think he is one of the most underrated players in the game. He had a 1.16, the best KD on London, and he honestly has been a playmaker for them. I mean, he is a playmaker. He's a player that does a lot of the dirty work, okay? People, they don't give him credit because he might not be as flashy. He might not have the best stats, but as a player, like Asum is a player's player, okay? The players in the league respect him. They think he's talented. They think he's good, but he's really showing it so far to the fans heading into the first Major. He's been great. But enough about some of the teams and the players that have been performing exceptionally well so far. There's something that I have to talk about, and that's the fact that there's 8 teams. I'm not kidding. There are 8 teams that are tied in the standings right now. Now, I know the sample size is small. Okay, there's only been 4 series. It's a long season and we just started. I get that, but it's been weird because teams have been beating each other and losing to teams that the others beating. That's kind of confusing me. But what I mean by that is, for example, Optic Gaming beat Florida Mutineers rather easily. Well, I shouldn't say rather easily, but they beat them. And then Florida Mutineers went back and they beat LAT fairly convincingly. And then LAT go and they beat Optic fairly convincingly. Well, it was maybe not fairly convincingly, but they beat Optic regardless. There's a lot of solid teams this year. I don't know right now if there's any dominant teams or any teams that really stand out amongst the rest. Even Minnesota and Toronto, they look great, but you've also seen their weaknesses. If you look at it right here, the teams that are tied are the Atlanta FaZe, Boston Breach, London Royal Ravens, Los Angeles Thieves, Optic Texas, the Los Angeles Gorillas, surprisingly, New York Subliners, and the Florida Mutineers, with the Seattle Surge and the Las Vegas Legion in 11th and 12th with 10 points. But so this is super close. And Like I said, I know it's early, I get that, but this first major is going to be important because we're really going to see how these teams play on LAN. And like I said, this is a pool play to a bracket play, but they're not just going to be going up against each other. They're also going to be going up against the challenger teams. These are teams that maybe they've barely played, if they've played at all. Maybe these are teams that they don't know how they play. They haven't watched any VOD. They know nothing about them. They don't even know the players on the team. So it'll be interesting to see how this kind of shakes out. In my opinion, I think that we could have some upsets. There could be some challengers teams that actually make it pretty far in the tournament. And I got to give a special congrats to the Las Vegas Legion. Okay, that's one of the storylines that I want to talk about this week. They finally won a series. It's the first time in I think damn near a year that they've won a single series. Now, that's pathetic, but they're on the right track. Okay, they got on the board. Maybe that's what they needed to kind of get in rhythm, get some momentum, get some confidence in themselves. I do think this is the best Legion team that we've seen in a long time. Don't get me wrong, but it'll be interesting to see if they can kind of keep this winning streak alive, especially heading into the major. I'm not the biggest fan of the team. I think they have some good pieces. I think they're a solid team, but look, at the end of the day, they're a team of the scraps. And I'm not talking about London Sub. I'm not talking about the player. They were just kind of the leftovers. Now, I would love to see them make kind of a Cinderella story happen, really go deep into the tournament, really prove a lot of people wrong. Because I team with Clay, love Temp. TJ's my boy. I'm his boogeyman. Don't really know Prolu at all, but I'd love to see the underdogs win. So shout out to them for finally getting a series win, but we'll see if they can get any more at the tournament. Some other results that happened this past week. Boston Breach looked great after the first week of the qualifiers. They beat two top teams. Well, at least on paper, you would assume they're top teams so far in the game, in Atlanta FaZe and the Seattle Surge. They won both series 3-1. I would say that they were probably the underdogs in those series, but they looked good. And then going into this past weekend, they had an easy schedule in terms of how teams have played so far. They had LAG and NYSL, and shockingly, they lost to both. They lost 3-2. They got reverse swept by the Subliners, who I'm not high on right now. And they also lost to LAG 3-1, who I'm also not high on. I don't think either of those two teams have been playing exceptionally well by any means. I don't even think they've been playing solid at all. It's been pretty bad Call of Duty, in my opinion, from watching. But to see Boston win those two series against two top teams and then struggle against teams, I don't know if maybe they just started out hot. We're in the beginning of the season, so if you're ahead of other teams by even like a day, that is massive. So I don't know if it's that or if they kind of play up to their competition. Maybe they thought they had free wins versus LAG and NYSL. Not really sure, but that was surprising to me. As well as the London Royal Ravens, because they started out 2-0. Also, they ended 2-2. They are one of the teams that are tied, but they looked very competitive. Even though they lost to Seattle and Optic in this past weekend's matches, they lost 3-1 in a pretty close series versus Seattle, and then 3-2 versus Optic, where they're competing. Okay, a lot of people, the coaches had London ranked the absolute worst in scrims going into these qualifiers, and they looked like one of the best teams in the game. Now, it's only online, so we're gonna have to see how they perform on LAN, but this is a team I'm rooting for. This is a team I'm rooting for. I feel like these guys are another underdog team that maybe they're not getting as much credit as they deserve, but we just have to wait and see. And talking a little bit about the hometown team in the Los Angeles Thieves, they're also 2-2. They beat the Legion and they beat Optic, but they lost to Atlanta FaZe 2-3 and the Mutineers 1-3. But what's surprising to me is for them to be 2-2 when the only player on their team right now that is positive in the game is Draza with a 1.09. Kenny's got a 0.91. Octane's got a 0.88. Envoy's got a 0.98. So obviously they're close. You know, it's not like they're getting smoked, but their overall team KD is below a 1.0. And the fact that they're winning these series, it tells me that they are what we thought they were, just a very good team. Okay, it's one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, why they won COD Champs last year. They obviously had unbelievably talented players, but they don't play off the back of their talent. They play to work as a team, to, you know, be completely selfless in the sense of they're going to do whatever they can to make the right team play, whether it puts them in a bad position, whether they don't get, you know, a 1.5 KD, whatever the case may be, they're going to do whatever they need to do. So I think if they can improve individually a little bit, you know, because I'm not going to make excuses for them with those KDs, they're probably, you know, losing some key gunfights. Maybe they're not understanding the game as well as others right now. But it's a good sign, because if that is one of your biggest issues, I think, going into this major, we're back on LAN. We're not online. They're not in LA anymore. So I expect LAT to have a pretty good first major of the year. And just to kind of give you guys context on what I mean by that, Optic Texas is another team like that, where they're 2-2. The only positive one so far is Scump with a 1.18. He's dominant so far in this game, but they're a team that they're finding ways to win, whether it be in the SNDs, whether it be just being a gritty team, pulling out a win that you probably shouldn't have had realistically. But those are all technically good signs. You know, then you look at a team like Atlanta FaZe, and their overall KDs are pretty absurd. They're also 2-2. They are also in this bubble of teams that are tied. And I'll just read these out. Slasher's got a 1.11 KD. Abeezy's got a 1.04. Celium's got a 1.39. And Sim's got a 1.04. So all of them have an above a 1 KD, and yet they are 2-2. It is early, like I said, but maybe they aren't playing the game as correctly as they need to be with how many kills they're getting, with how good they're playing individually. But once again, we just have to wait and see. I'm just trying to like point everything out, okay? I'm not making any rash decisions or any irrational opinions on any of these teams, because we haven't seen them play online. Online, I'm from the old school. I don't really care about online stats. I don't really care about their online play. I don't care what anyone says. Online to LAN is a completely different story, okay? But all in all, it's been a very exciting and intense qualifiers. You know, this could be the closest competition we had in Call of Duty history. Now, everyone says that every year, but the fact that it seems like every team is just beating every team, there isn't anyone that stands out. And I think that's a little surprising, because normally there are a couple teams that do stand out in the beginning of these games. But I'm excited. I'm excited. This old school style LAN event is going to be crazy. I wish I was there in person, but I am going to be doing a watch party from my crib. As always, guys, I appreciate the love. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm going to see y'all when I see y'all.